Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera semua. Kita sambung hari ini dengan political and legal systems in national environment. Today we will try to understand the nature of country risk, basically the political and legal environments in international business. Sometimes country risk is also known as political risk. So here we will discuss political system, legal system, who are the participants in the political and legal system, the types of country risk produced by different political systems, and different types of country risk produced by different types of legal systems. Lastly, we will also discuss how to manage country risk. As mentioned earlier, country risk is also known as political risk. The definition is exposure to potential loss or adverse effects on company operations and profitability caused by developments in a country's political and or legal environment. Contohnya, kalau ada beberapa perubahan yang berlaku dari segi politik atau dari segi undang-undang ataupun kestabilan in general yang berlaku di dalam sesebuah negara, itu akan memberikan exposure lah kepada company yang menjalankan perniagaan antara bangsa in terms of their operations and profitability. Again, it's also known as political risk, and remember, each country has unique political and legal systems. Bukan negara yang tidak membangun sahaja yang ada political risk, negara yang membangun pun mempunyai political risk. So they often pose challenges for company performance. Isu terkini adalah isu politics di Sudan. Sudan as it is already one of the underdeveloped countries. Oleh itu agak mencabar bagi syarikat-syarikat antarabangsa untuk menjalankan perniagaan mereka di negara tersebut. With this political situation that is going on, this will negatively impact its operation. International businesses operation, basically nak beroperasi pun agak berisiko lah if you can see the situation there. So what does this mean for the revenue of the firms? So agak berisiko. We have discussed cross-cultural risk 2 weeks back. Today we will discuss country risk or political risk. Country risk comes from harmful or unstable political system, laws and regulations unfavorable to foreign firms, inadequate or underdeveloped legal system, bureaucracy, red tape. In some cases, some countries are very high in corruption. So this will affect ethical issues, and some countries have high government intervention, protectionism and barriers for trade and investment. Ini akan memberikan impact jugalah kepada operasi-operasi beberapa syarikat antarabangsa. Lastly, there will be issues of mismanagement or failure of the national economy. Let's take a look into the map here. This map can be obtained from this website, cofis.com. So, according to this map, these are 162 countries di mana mereka menunjukkanlah the extent of political risk or country risk in different countries. Biasanya kalau map sebegini, the green indicates stability, peace, red or yellow indicates caution or danger. Let's look into the most dangerous indicator here, E. Anda boleh tengok negara-negara yang ditunjukkan E ni adalah negara-negara di Afrika dan juga Middle East, which is not so surprising, and a country in Latin America. Kebiasaannya negara-negara ini have been experiencing stability for quite some time. Let's look into the definition first. A political system is a set of formal institutions that constitute a government. It includes legislative bodies, political parties, lobbying groups and trade unions. This system also defines how these groups interact with each other. There are 3 major types of political system. Today we will discuss totalitarianism, socialism and democracy. Also remember that these categories are not mutually exclusive. Apakah maksud dekat sini? Agak jarang pada zaman sekarang untuk negara-negara mengamalkan 100% totalitarianism, 100% socialism or 100% democracy. Legal system on the other hand is a system for interpreting and enforcing laws. They also refer to the laws, regulations and rules which establish norms of conduct. Apa yang boleh, apa yang tak boleh, what is good and what is right. It incorporates institutions and procedures for ensuring order and resolving disputes in commercial activities, as well as protecting intellectual property and taxing economic output. Here and today, we will discuss 4 major types of legal system: common law, civil law, religious law, and also mixed system. Sources of country risk are divided into two, iaitu dua aspek yang kita akan bincangkan pada hari ini. First is political system and also laws and regulations. Who are the players of the political system which provides as sources of country risk? First is the government. The government also consists of political parties, legislative bodies, lobbying groups, trade unions, and other political institutions. The legal system can also be a source of country risk, but the laws, regulations, and rules, they aim to ensure order, resolve disputes, protect intellectual property, and tax economic output. Walau bagaimanapun, different laws akan memberikan impact lah kepada performance of international businesses being conducted in the host country. You can see here, kadang-kadang when you look into the news, you see the headlines, and then when you read the headlines, it seems a bit illogical. But the news can show the extent of political stability in that country. Saya bagi contoh di sini, Nigeria. As you look into the headline here, Nigeria probing how guerrilla swallowed 19,000 euro US dollars, I assume, in zoo funds. Kalau fikir logik, anda boleh tanyalah diri sendiri kan, gorilla macam mana dia nak telan 19,000 USD worth of cash? And here, Nigerian snake ate millions of naira. Naira would be the currency of Nigeria. Macam mana dia boleh telan that much money, that much cash? Adakah logik atau tak logik? But as a foreigner, as a decision maker reading this news, what are your perceptions of Nigeria then? The situation that we are experiencing right now is COVID-19. Although this is not directly a political issue, but it has impacted businesses that provide exported items, especially from China. Countries reject Chinese-made equipment because of the coronavirus issue. In socialism system, capital is vested in the state. It is used primarily as a means of production for use rather than for profit. Oleh itu, group welfare will be more important than individual welfare. So, the government's role is to control the basic means of production, distribution, and commercial activity. As of right now, socialism occurs in much of the world as social democracy. For instance, Western Europe countries, Brazil and India, they used to practice socialism, but now they are being practiced as social democracy. You can see also in these countries, they have government intervention in the private sector and they have relatively higher income tax rates. Tanzania is an example of country practicing socialism. As you can see here, the country risk rating is C, which is the outlook of political and economical environment is quite uncertain, and again, this will have significant impact on corporate payment behavior. The business climate rating is also C, but they also have their strengths. Anda boleh tengok dekat sini, they are rich in mineral resources, gas potential, they also have tourism potential. Kerana biasanya negara-negara sebegini belum betul-betul dimajukan lagi. Oleh itu, their natural resources are still quite high. They also have regional cooperation strategy, international support, and also development of monetary policy instrument. However, they have several weaknesses. First, they have high reliance on gold price. They are also dependent on the agricultural sector. Ini berdasarkan their characteristics as negara yang sedang membangun. They also have inadequate infrastructure, inconsistent industrial policy, and also they have religious tensions with their neighboring countries. How about democracy? For democracy, countries that practice democratic systems, they enjoy economic activity that occurs freely. Free economic activity meaning that they follow market forces. supply and demand. In this system, they have limited government control, whereby the government will perform only essential functions that serve all citizens. Example, national defense, contohnya military lah, maintaining law and order, foreign relations and also providing basic infrastructure, jalan, railroad dan sebagainya. People living in democratic countries are able to enjoy private property rights, which is the ability to own property and assets and to increase their asset base by accumulating private wealth. Oleh itu, competitiveness is very much appreciated in this type of countries, and usually democratic countries are quite high in capitalism. So this property can include land, buildings, stocks, contracts and patents. This system encourages people to be more initiative, to have ambition and also for companies to have more innovation. One of the countries practicing democracy is Finland. So if you can see here, the country risk rating is A, in which the political and economic situation is good, it is stable, they also have an efficient business environment. The business climate rating is also A. We look into the strengths quickly. They have prudent or stable economic policies, skilled economic workforce, cutting-edge industries and also high standard of living. Bear in mind, these type of countries also have their own weaknesses. First, they are highly vulnerable to international situation. Remember how economic activity occurs freely according to market forces, and because of that, this exposes this type of countries to globalization. They also will likely face industrial crisis and loss of competitiveness. They also depend on the Swedish and Danish financial sectors. Ini yang paling utama, they are experiencing an aging population. So logically, in this type of countries where competition is highly valued, people will start family quite late. If people start families quite late, they are also at risk of having an aging population. Some examples of totalitarianism countries here, Cuba, North Korea and some countries in Africa. Some examples of socialism practicing countries include these countries, and some countries that are largely democratic can be shown here. Economic freedom and political freedom, usually they go hand in hand. As citizens of a country, you will feel like your right as consumers will also depend on political freedom as well, because you are also a player in the economy. Anda boleh lihat di sini, Singapore walaupun negara yang maju, the political freedom is quite low, but the economic freedom is quite high. Countries such as Australia, Denmark, Sweden and so on, they have largely high economic freedom and also high political freedom. This is the opposite of North Korea, which has low economic freedom and also political freedom. So what are the implications of the systems towards business? Totalitarianism is associated with command economies. Maksud command economies di sini adalah the government or the state will make all decisions on what to produce, how much and what prices to charge. This means stability, but this also reduces competitiveness and reduces freedom for their citizens. Socialism is associated with mixed economies. So mixed economies have features of both market and command economies. So they combine state intervention ataupun campur tangan government and also market mechanism. When they talk about market mechanism in business, it's always the supply and demand power. Democracy is associated with market economies and capitalism. So here, decisions are largely left to market forces. So market forces, again, it's supply and demand. So you can imagine countries that practice full democracy are highly vulnerable to globalization effects. Let's look into the legal system. Legal system follows rule of law, which is the existence of a legal system where rules are clear, publicly disclosed, fairly enforced, and widely respected by individuals, organizations, and the government. The rule of law is more common in advanced economies. Legal system is applied to all citizens equally, issued through recognized government authorities, termasuklah mahkamah, polis dan sebagainya. It is enforced fairly and systematically by police forces, penguat kuasa undang-undang ya, dan informally organised judicial bodies, mahkamah dan sebagainya. When the rule of law is weak, economic activity will suffer. Uncertainty will also increase because the rule of law is the standard of conduct. Let's look into different legal system one by one. First is civil law. Civil law is found in France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Turkey, and Latin America. How to differentiate between civil law and common law? You think about countries that are colonized by UK, by Britain, and countries that are not colonized by Britain. Usually, countries that are not colonized by Britain, they practice civil law. So it is based on an all-inclusive system of laws that have been codified. So this law is clearly written by legislative bodies. In civil law, laws are more cast in stone. They are not strongly subject to court's interpretation. A key difference is that common law is mainly judicial in origin. They are based on court decision. As mentioned before, it is cast in stone for civil law. So civil law is mainly legislative. It is based on laws passed by national and state legislatures. Common law is a legal system originated in England. Basically, countries that have been colonized by Britain. Kalau nak ingat dengan lebih senang, British Commonwealth countries, they practice common law. They are also known as case law, and the basis of law is tradition, past practices, and legal precedents set by courts. But they have interpretation of statutes, legislation, and past rulings. In this system, judges have much power to interpret laws based on the circumstances of individual cases. So, in comparison to civil law, common law is relatively flexible. This is a simplification of civil law and common law. I put these two pictures here. I want you to differentiate common law and civil law. I want you to be able to identify common law and civil law by identifying common law is the type of law practiced by countries that have been colonized by Britain and Britain themselves. Civil law practiced by other countries. Let's look into the legal issues and how they are being practiced. Ownership of intellectual property for civil law is determined by registration. Common law is determined by prior use. How to enforce agreements? For civil law, commercial agreements become enforceable only if properly notarized or registered. But for common law, proof of agreement is sufficient for enforcing contracts. The specificity of contracts is also different between civil law and common law. For civil law, contracts tend to be brief because many potential problems are already covered in the civil code. Remember, it's more cast in stone. For common law, because they are so flexible, contracts tend to be detailed with all possible contingencies. Usually, it's more costly to draft a contract. Compliance. For civil law, non-compliance is extended to include unforeseeable human acts, including labour strikes, riots. But for common law, acts of God are the only justifiable excuses for non-compliance with the provisions of contracts. Religious law is also one of the laws still primarily used around the world. Religious laws is strongly influenced by religious belief, ethical codes, and moral values, and viewed as mandated by a supreme being. So most important religious legal systems are based on Hindu, Jewish, and also Islamic law. More common in practice at the moment is Islamic law because they spell out norms of behavior regarding politics, economics, banking, contracts, marriage, and many other social and business issues. In the modern world, a lot of countries, they practice mixed system, which is two or more legal systems operating together. In mixed systems, the contrast between civil and common law is blurred because most countries, they combine both systems. What is the connection between legal system and political system? Totalitarianism is mostly associated with religious law and socialist law, while democracy is associated with common law, civil law, and mixed system. So you can see the examples here. Countries practicing primarily common law, civil law, religious law, and also mixed system. Who are the participants in the political and legal systems of a country? The highest level of participant in a country is the government, also known as the public sector, operating at national and local levels. What do they mean by local levels? Meaning that it's based on state. Kalau dekat Malaysia, di bahagian negeri, daerah dan sebagainya. This is observed by international organizations such as World Bank, World Trade Organizations, and also the United Nations. At the same time, regional economic blocs, they determine the freedom of movement for citizens between countries. So this can be European Union, NAFTA. NAFTA is North American Free Trade Agreement. Malaysia is part of ASEAN. This will determine the friendships between countries and also our freedom as citizens to travel within the region. Another participant in political and legal system is special interest groups. So they can be labour unions and also environmental advocates. Pejuang-pejuang persekitaran misalnya. At the same time, the company operating in the international market will be facing local competing firms. Local competing firms or local competitors, they usually oppose foreign firms. I would like to highlight SIGS. What are SIGS? These are special interest groups. They are not formally part of the legal system, but they have much power in influencing the local government. The first group of special interest group is labour union. Usually, they will fight for issues such as imported goods, global sourcing, because they take away local jobs. You can see this, for example, the US United Steelworkers Union, they oppose imports of steel from China. In Malaysia also, we have faced with the same issue during the time when Uber and Grabcar decided to enter Malaysia. There was a strong opposition from the taxi driver labour union. Of course, because Uber and Grabcar, they are about to steal these taxi drivers' jobs. Competing business can be a special interest group as well, specifically local competing business. Why? Because they dislike competition from foreign firms. For example, Japanese rice producers opposed imports of rice from the United States. Customer groups can also be a special interest group. So they usually have issues such as avoiding foreign-made products, maybe issues of nationalism, some sensitivity. So they also dislike improper marketing practices. For example, motorists in Australia, they accuse BP, British Petroleum, of unfair pricing of petroleum products. Another group, and one of the most important groups, is conservationists. They usually fight against wildlife loss and also destruction of the natural environment. Environmentalists, for example, they oppose lumber imports from countries with tropical rain forests. What are the types of country risk produced by different political systems? Country risk, they take many forms. First is confiscation, rampasan. Confiscation basically is the seizure of corporate assets without compensation. For instance, in 2008, whites of Zimbabwe's land confiscation during Mugabe's command. Mugabe was one of the presidents of Zimbabwe. They pushed the idea of pure Zimbabwe. So no whites, no Europeans. So this person here, Ben, he has been living with his family in Zimbabwe for a long time. So they have land, they have farms and all that. But during Mugabe's command, he was beaten, his land was being seized. So that was confiscation. Another type is expropriation, which is asset seizure with compensation. For example, land expropriation in Turkey because the state could not pay the cost. Another type is nationalisation, which is the takeover of an entire industry with or without compensation. Ini pernah terjadi di sebuah airport sub-sub, iaitu airport Bolivia. So the government decided to nationalise the whole industry. So companies that were supposed to be part of the industry had to tone down their power and also had to make some changes because of the nationalisation effort. Creeping expropriation is the most common expropriation today. Why they call it creeping? Because the government gradually modifies regulations and laws after foreign multinational companies have made big local investments in property and plants. Dah masuk di sebuah negara, susahlah nak keluar kan. The companies have been investing millions, even billions. So, when you are already in the host country, the government will slowly make changes that will affect the company. Some examples here: abrupt or quick termination of contracts, creation of laws that favour local firms. For instance, the governments in Bolivia, Russia and Venezuela, they modified tax system lah, to extract revenues from coal, oil and gas companies. Ini penting, embargoes and sanctions. Governments may respond to offensive activities of foreign countries by imposing embargo and sanctions. Ini adalah langkah-langkah politik, tapi langkah-langkah politik ini akan memberikan impak kepada urus niaga yang akan berlaku di antara negara-negara. Dua yang paling penting adalah embargo dan sanctions. Embargoes are bans on export or import that forbid trade in specific goods with specific countries. Export or import. So maybe kalau ada export je, they do not import, they do not buy, they only sell. Or maybe they only buy, they do not sell. For example, the US enforced embargo against Cuba, Iran and North Korea because they are being labelled as state sponsors of terrorism. Sanctions, they are bans on international trade. Oleh itu, export pun ban, import pun tak ada. So they are usually undertaken by a country or a group of countries against another judged to have jeopardized peace and security. Sekali lagi, ini langkah-langkah politik. The US have sanctions against Burma, Cuba, Iran, North Korea. Malaysia also, they have sanctions on countries like Afghanistan, Congo, Eritrea and Sudan. Another issue in political risk is boycotts against firms and nations. What are boycotts? They are voluntary refusal to engage in commercial dealings with a nation or a company. France is a good example for this because they have been boycotted. They also have a long history of boycott. For example, when Disneyland decided to enter Paris and decided to build a park there, the French citizens boycotted Disneyland Paris to express opposition to globalization. Also, is nationalism issues because a lot of what is happening is Disney wants to take over French farmland. So, Disney is US based. So, having a US based theme park in France, meaning that a foreign firm is taking away part of their country. Still France, French farmers boycotted McDonald's and crashed a tractor into a shop because they are angry with agricultural policies and globalization. So, a lot of nationalism issues in France. At the same time, French products have also been boycotted as well. Look at the type of country risk produced by different legal system. I would like to highlight war and insurrection. Ketidakstabilan sesebuah negara yang dilihat dari segi peperangan dan ketidakstabilan di antara negara secara politik. They have indirect effects and then can be disastrous for company activities. You can see this in terrorism. The threat or actual use of force or violence to attain a political goal through fear and intimidation. Some terrorism activities, they are sponsored by national governments. They are particularly affecting certain industries. I would like to highlight tourism, because if there's no tourism, it will affect hospitality, aviation, finance and retailing. Because tourism is basically large sum of money from a lot of people from outside. So if this activity is failing, other activities are also slowing down as well. You can see this in these two pictures. This is Afghanistan before 2001 and this is Afghanistan after 2001. Seems like this is happening in the 60s or 50s, but this is actually after 2001. There are also country risks that comes from the host country legal government. First, through foreign investment laws, controls on operating forms and practices, marketing and distribution laws, laws regarding income repatriation. Apakah itu income repatriation? Duit atau hasil yang dinikmati oleh company yang berkhidmat di sesebuah host country, adakah nak simpan dekat host country ataupun home country. Also issues in environmental laws, contract laws, inadequate or underdeveloped legal system. Also, different countries have different internet and e-commerce regulations. Some foreign investment laws, they affect FDI-based entry. Basically, companies that enter a host country using foreign direct investment, they are exposed to the host country's laws as well. Some examples here in Japan. They have a large-scale retail store law to protect smaller Japanese retailers. So this law will restrict foreigners from opening warehouse-type stores like Toys R Us. In Mexico, foreign oil companies cannot obtain 100% ownership of Mexican oil firms, again to protect local firms. In the US, it's more about protecting national security. So they restrict investments that seem to affect their security. For example, they used to block Dubai Ports World, which is a Middle Eastern firm. There are also controls on operating forms and practices. So these are laws and regulations on how firms can conduct production, marketing and distribution activities. For example, in China, in the telecommunication sector, the Chinese government require foreign investors to have joint venture with local firms. This makes sure that the Chinese government have control of the telecom industry, and local firms, Chinese firms, can gain access and learn from foreign investors, especially in terms of foreign capital and also technology. There are also marketing and distribution laws that regulate practices in advertising, promotion and distribution. Some examples here: Finland, France, Norway and New Zealand, they prohibit cigarette advertising on television, and Canada and some countries, they cap prices in the pharmaceutical and other industries. So this will reduce competition using price. There are also laws on income repatriation. So they limit the amount of net income or dividends that firms can bring back to their home country. So basically, the principle is, you come to a host country, you make a lot of money, you cannot quickly transfer the amount back to the home country. There are also environmental laws. They aim to preserve natural resources, combat pollution and also ensure safety. In the consumer level, there are contract laws. So these laws affect the sale of goods and services, intermediary agreements, licensing, franchising, foreign direct investment and also joint ventures. Some countries have inadequate or underdeveloped legal system. So this can be troublesome for companies operating overseas. And in some countries, the laws may be weak regarding intellectual property. So it can be problematic. Most importantly, while these issues are common in developing economies, advanced economies also have their own problem. For example, in China and Russia, foreign firms sometimes abandon business ventures because of problematic legal environments. And the recent global financial crisis around 2007-2008, it was triggered partly by poor regulation in the US and Europe. That financial crisis started in advanced economies, not developing or underdeveloped economies. Some country risk can come from the home country legal environment. The concept I would like to introduce to you is the concept of extraterritoriality. This is the application of home country laws to other countries. Also, accounting and reporting laws differ widely around the world. I give you two examples. In accounting, you must have asset valuation. For Canada and US, they use historical costs. Latin American countries, they use inflation adjusted market value. R&D cost expenditure will be different as well. The expenses as incurred in most of the world. Only when it's being spent, only then is taken into account. But in South Korea and Spain, you take the whole amount as capital. But some countries, they use both. There are also differences in transparency in financial reporting. So firms regularly reveal substantial financial and accounting information, and the extent of how much and how transparent they are will vary worldwide. This is important. Many countries, they lack anti-bribery laws for international transaction. That is why the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, they call for a ban on grease payments, small bribes. So these are small-scale bribes intended to speed up telephone hookups, government paperwork, and so on. But this is also considered a bribe. Why? Because a culture of grease payments and other corruption is harming the rule of law. They do not respect the rule of law, and it is harmful for sustainable economic development. So you can see here, these are the top 20 countries where bribes are most common. All of these countries, I hope there are no countries that are related to us, but these countries, they have several things in common. They are underdeveloped, they are mostly in Asia, and most of them are not so stable. So what are the implications? To manage country risk, managers must practice proactive environmental scanning. Management should develop a comprehensive understanding of the political and legal environment in target countries. So, they must scan. Scanning is the ongoing assessment of potential risk and threats to the firm through sources such as employees working in the host country. Maybe they want to send their employees in a target country, get more information from the embassy or trade association officials, or maybe they want to refer to consulting firms. A way to manage country risk is to have strict adherence, mengikuti ethical standards. Firms that engage in questionable practices or operate outside the law usually will invite redress from the governments of the host countries where they do business. This is a strategy that's been used by a lot of companies from the West. Have alliances with qualified local partners. For example, firms often enter China and Russia by partnering with local firms. So what they get is, they get assistance in navigating the complex legal and political landscape. Next is to have protection through legal contracts. Because contract laws vary widely, the firms must follow the law in each country. But sometimes dispute happens. So there are 3 approaches to resolve contract disputes. First is conciliation. This is a formal process of negotiation where the objective is to resolve differences in a friendly manner. So usually this is practiced in harmony-focused countries. For instance, China. Firms can also choose arbitration, which is a neutral third party hear both sides of a case, then decide in favor of one party or the other based on the objective assessment of the facts. So they have a neutral third party. The most adversarial approach is litigation. Bagi saman lah. They file a lawsuit against another. Usually, it's more common in the United States. So here, today, we have discussed the nature of country risk or political risk. basically the political and legal system, and what are the risks produced by different political and legal system. And also remember, country risk is a risk that you will face in underdeveloped countries, but also developed countries as well. That is why managers should be able to manage different types of country risk. I hope all of you have learned something today. This lesson is not so long, but it will require a lot of reading and will require you to refer to a lot of examples to have further understanding. I will see you again next time. Thank you very much.